Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning, rise and shine. Okay, if you want to know, I made this recording at 5:30 a.m. just for you for the topic 5 foodborne illness. Okay, please study this topic 5 because it will be included in your mid-semester test. Okay, so previously we have learned on the food pathogen, where you have presented some of the food pathogens such as virus, Campylobacter jejuni, and also Toxoplasma gondii, right? And today we are learning some of others pathogen as well, and we might want to know how this pathogen is transmitted from the food and subsequently into your body, right? So in this topic 5, you should be able to learn, or you should be able to describe what is foodborne illness, and you should be able to describe the bacteria foodborne illness, the characteristic, and the control and the prevention for the foodborne illness. And also in this lecture we will explain on the type of least food hazard, an example of which, and we might want to know how we can prevent the bacterial growth by knowing the condition of the optimum for this bacteria to grow on the food. Okay, before that, right? So you might want to know, or you might want wondering the definition of the foodborne illness. Okay, if you still remember the first lecture on the introduction of foodborne illness, I have mentioned the word of foodborne illness and foodborne intoxication. Okay, so foodborne intoxication is if we consume the food that is contaminated by the toxin that is produced by the pathogen, while foodborne illness is an illness is caused by eating food that is contaminated by the food pathogens. Okay, so I just highlight here bacteria. So the agent is bacteria. Okay, although most of the 70% foodborne illness is caused by bacteria, the other 30% of foodborne illness can be caused by the harmful substance, which we will categorize as a chemical hazard and physical hazard, right? Okay, so there are three pathways of which foodborne can be hazardous. Okay, the primary pathway is from the agent, the biological agent of bacteria and viruses. And the second pathway is through the chemical, contamination of chemical. Chemical can come either from the food itself, or either can become from the environment, or unintentionally chemical hazard. Okay, and physical hazard, usually physical hazards can come from the food handler's personal hygiene itself. Okay, most of the physical hazard reported such as they found a string hair, and they found glasses in the food, so that is considered as physical hazards, right? And you might want to know what kind of food that make this pathogen love. But before that, I must emphasize that food, okay, I must put somewhere here, food is not a reservoir for the pathogen. Okay, so food is actually a vehicle for this pathogen. What does it mean by vehicle? Vehicle means it is a transport for these pathogens to be transmitted into the human body. Okay, so food is acting as a transport. So we must know what kind of food does these bacteria or these viruses love to inhibit. So I use the word inhibit. Okay, we call this food is as TCS food. Okay, TCS is an acronym stand for temperature and time control safety food, which means the food is something that is high in moisture, something that is high in protein and carbohydrate, and this food have slightly acidic pH. Okay, so one of the way to control the bacterial growth is by controlling the temperature and the time. Okay, we will look into it when we come to the subsection of the factors that prevent the microbial growth. Okay, so you have learned about the TCS food. Now let us see what are examples of TCS food. So the most food that is reported contaminated by pathogen is dairy product. Okay, come from milk, cheese, and eggs, some poultry product, meat, fish and shellfish, potatoes, yes, potatoes, and even rice that you eat, a cooked rice. Okay, why cooked rice? You must remember some of the pathogens, the heat labile pathogens, those pathogens that can survive in high temperature, such as bacillus, they can grow on cooked rice. Okay, and also a product that comes from soy or legumes, because these products are high in protein. Food pathogen love high protein foods. Okay, food that comes from bean that is sprouted, right? Vegetables and untreated oil. Okay, these are some of examples of TCS food that pathogen love to grow on. Right? Okay. So most of the foodborne illness reported is not due to the ingestion of the food itself. It is actually comes from the bad handling of the food. Okay, these bacteria are transferred from the food handler's hand or from the dirty cooking utensils onto the food and subsequently into your mouth. Okay, this term is known as cross-contamination. These are the process of pathogen transferation that is usually happen in foodborne illness. Okay. Alright, as I mentioned earlier, the TCS food is a food that have high protein and also neutral, slightly acidic pH. That is one of the food that perhaps we can control. And the others of the condition that permit the bacterial growth are the condition of the warm and moist, and also this is a very crucial, the temperature of which bacteria can multiply dozens or even millions. Okay, we call it as a danger zone temperature. Okay, this temperature is within 5 degrees Celsius until 57 or 60 degrees Celsius. Right? So you have know some of the factors that we can control in order to inhibit the bacterial growth. So actually, if I summarize, we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factors of bacterial growth. Okay, I summarize it in an acronym of FATM. The first F stands for food, A for acidity, T for time, T for temperature, O for oxygen, and M for moisture. Okay, let us go one by one of these letters. Okay, the first F is the food. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, bacteria love to grow on the food that has higher protein and carbohydrate content. So these foods such as meat, poultry, baked potatoes, dairy products, and eggs. Okay. And the other factors is acidity, the environment pH, whereby most of the food pathogen can live in the slightly acidic food. okay, in the pH of 4.6 to 7.6. Okay, if we can control the pH, therefore we can control the bacterial growth. Right, the third factor is temperature. As I always emphasize, the temperature within the danger zone is a very crucial temperature that we need to control. Okay, because if the food falls within the danger zone of 4 degrees Celsius or 5 degrees Celsius until 60 degrees Celsius, the food can become hazardous. Okay, can become hazardous and have potential to be contaminated. Therefore, if you want to prepare food, okay, this process include thawing, cooling the food, cooking the food, heating and reheating the food. You have to ensure the food temperature by probing a thermometer into the food. Okay, so this four step of food preparation is a very crucial, or what we call it as a critical control point. So I just put here a critical control point of which a bacteria can grow, multiply if the food fall within the danger zone. Okay, that is the factors of temperature. Alright, the other crucial factor is time. Okay, with an optimum temperature of 4 degrees to 60 degrees plus with the longer time, you can imagine how many bacteria can multiply. Okay, usually within 20 minutes they can capable to multiply millions of population. Okay, imagine if we put the foods at within the danger zone temperature, they can reach billions and trillions of population. Okay, therefore, temperature with the time control at least not more than 4 hours is very crucial in order to maintain the food in optimal bacterial growth, which means not to maintain, to control the bacterial growth. Okay, right, therefore please remember these two factors are the critical control point factors, okay, in foodborne illness prevention. Right, and the other factors is oxygen. Okay, most of the bacteria pathogen cannot live without oxygen, but there are some of the pathogens that can live without oxygen, or we can classify this kind of pathogen as anaerobic pathogens such as bacillus. Okay, bacillus, they can live or they can survive without oxygen on the cooked rice, on the baked potatoes, and also in the untreated garlic and oil mixtures. Okay, there's some bacteria that can live without oxygen. Okay, why we need to know about the oxygen factors? Because there are some of food processing which we can use to minimize the bacterial growth, such as vacuumization. Okay, those are type of the food treatment which we can use in order to minimize the food contamination. Okay, that is the sixth factor, oxygen. And the last factor is moisture, or in other words we call it as a water content. Right, moisture or a water content of the food. Okay, if you can see, some of the food has higher water content, such as the fresh food or the dairy products. Okay, this food usually have higher water activity. Okay, remember, water content and water activity are two different things. Okay, water activity is the water that is not bound to the food molecule. Okay, let me write somewhere here. Okay, and water content is the total of water that is found in a food, which include the water that is bound to the molecule and the water that is not bound to the molecule. Okay, usually in the food safety terms, in order to measure which food is more perishability, alright, you come across the word of perishability. Perishability means that the food is easily to become contaminated. Okay, that is the word perishability, right? Come back again. The food that has high water activity is the food that is perishable. Okay, such as fresh fruit, meat and milk, right? Why the food that has high water activity is more perishable? Okay, remember, those water activity are the water that is not bound with the food molecule. Therefore, this water is being used by these pathogen or these microbes to survive, right? So because of this, those food that is perishable, usually in order to control the water activity is by if we can refrigerate promptly, and if we can chill the food promptly in order to minimize the bacterial growth, right? So here are the table of water activity. Okay, the highest water activity number is 1. 1 is the highest, but usually the highest of the water activity in a food is marked by 0.95, which food that contain fresh food, fruits and milks, and also vegetables. Okay, so we have know all the 6 factors of the foodborne illness pathogen optimum growth. Okay, remember the word fatum. Now we come across to the foodborne illness, right? So we have known the foodborne pathogen factors. Okay, and most of the cases in foodborne illness is actually due to the bacterial agent. Okay, it is possible to prevent the foodborne illness, but it is impossible to eliminate the bacterial agent in our environment because they are present in the environment naturally. Even on your skin, we have Staph aureus. Okay, those are the bacteria that live on your skin as its natural reservoir, but incidentally transmitted from your skin on the food if you did not imply a proper personal hygiene. Okay, therefore, it is important for you, for the food handlers, to practice a good personal hygiene in order to minimize the illness of the foodborne. Okay, so we come to the first biological hazard of bacterial foodborne illness. These are the agent or the biological agent that is responsible in foodborne illness. In most of the cases comes from Salmonella, Clostridium, Staph, Bacillus, Streptococcus, Clostridium botulinum, okay, E. coli, Yersinia, and also Aeromonas hydrophilia. Right? Okay, if we go one by one for these food pathogens, okay, I am not going to explain each of it, but I just focus for those that is prevalent in foodborne illness, such as Staph aureus. If you can see in Staph aureus, you can see the natural habitat or the natural reservoir for this pathogen is in your nose, in your throat, on your skin, and most of Staph aureus can multiply in the superficial wounds. Okay, so this is a very crucial where if you found a food handlers that have wound on the skin, it is advisable for them not to handle the food, right? Similar to the Salmonella, where we can find this pathogen in the GI tract or in the intestinal tract of the animals. Okay, therefore, if you want to slaughter the animal, okay, it is very crucial to ensure that the guts or the intestine of the animal is not come into contact with the meat, right? Okay, most of the foodborne illness symptoms are very similar, where the patient will report having vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea, and some abdominal cramp, right? Okay, E. coli, right? So E. coli is one of the famous bacteria that have a natural reservoir in the feces. Okay, right? And this E. coli can be transmitted on the food from the unhygienic personal practices. Okay, if you can see some of the food handlers that wearing rings on the finger and come out from the toilet or washroom, please make sure not to eat food that is been handled by the food handler, right? Campylobacter jejuni, right? Some of the other bacteria that has inhibit in the food of meat, poultry, and milk dairy products. Alright, Clostridium. Okay, these both Clostridium perfringens and Clostridium botulinum, the natural reservoir is not on the food itself. It actually comes from the soil. Okay, most of them comes from the soil, but it can be contaminate the food from the way how the food is prepared. Okay, if the food handlers contact with soil or dust, it can contaminate the food, right? Or in the case of Clostridium botulinum, the Clostridium botulinum pathogen can contaminate the food from the improper canned food. Okay, they can survive in the improper canned food, right? Both Clostridium perfringens, okay, they affected central nervous system. Okay, in the case of Clostridium botulinum, the complication can lead to death, right? Okay. Why Clostridium perfringens and Clostridium botulinum is a very serious case? Because these bacteria can be killed by the normal cooking, but they produce spore, right? The most serious is due because of their spore and because of their toxic, right? The spore in the Clostridium perfringens is a heat-stable spore that can survive in high temperature, while the toxin that is produced by Clostridium botulinum can survive, okay, in lower temperature of 70 degrees. Therefore, it can be toxic if we let the food in the danger zone, right? Okay. And Vibrio is some other of the food pathogens. Bacillus cereus that I've mentioned before. The reservoir is in the soil and in the spices. Beware of these bacteria. Okay, these bacteria love to inhibit starch food, okay, such as rice. Right? Again, these Bacillus cereus, okay, they produce heat-resistant spore which can survive in high heat temperature. Right. You might want to ask if some of the bacteria that produce heat-resistant spore, how can we prevent or control this bacterial growth? It can be in the form of chilling and refrigeration. Okay. So in the case of Bacillus cereus, which can contaminate rice, for example, do not let the rice at the room temperature. Instead, refrigerate it. Right? And we have Listeria versina. Okay, those are the biological agents of food contamination. Okay, food contamination hazards. And the other biological hazard comes from the toxin that is produced by some of the mold or some of the fungus. Okay, the very prevalent cases comes from the aflatoxin contamination. Okay, aflatoxin is the mold, okay, that survive on the maize or on the corn. Here you can see, okay, those mold produce aflatoxin. Okay, this aflatoxin can be very dangerous, especially it cause GI disturbance. Right, and aspergillus mold. Okay, this aspergillus mold, usually we can see aspergillus mold on apple and pears. Okay, alright, and some other mold such as penicillium, okay, which we can see on some of the food. Okay, that is the biological hazards that is caused by mold or fungus. Okay, the other biological hazard comes from viruses. Okay, viruses that can live in shellfish and oysters, right? But most of the viruses can be destroyed by heat and normal cooking. But usually the symptom of the virus contamination include abnormal pain, fever, nausea and vomiting, similar to those food pathogens, right? And we come to the chemical hazard. Okay, as I mentioned very early in the first slide, the chemical hazard then comes from in the form of the natural chemical or the unintentional chemical hazard, but most of the foodborne illness that is due to chemical hazard comes from the pesticide and fertilizer. Okay, and there is a cases where chemical enters the food or spill to the food during the food processing or the food preparation. Okay, such example benzene contamination that comes from the plastic packaging, right? But usually chemical hazard is very rare, alright, because if it's happened, it might be due to the negligence. Okay, usually in the food industry, they have a very strict rules where they control the food packaging and the food preparation. Okay, and some of the chemical contamination can comes from the chemical additive itself, okay, such as nitrates and nitrates, okay, or boric acid that we have learned before. But this is usually if we put in a large amount of chemical additive, okay, it can cause a severe health problems, right? And the other use of chemical hazards such as antibiotics, okay, there is some of the cases where some of the food or poultry product is injected with antibiotic. But I think nowadays there is no cases regarding antibiotic. If there is, there are small cases. Right, what happens if the food is injected with antibiotics? It will lead to antibiotic resistant bacteria development, right? And the other factors of chemical hazard, some of the contaminants comes from the environment itself, such as dioxin. Okay, dioxin is a contamination that comes from the environment. Okay, dioxin can be found in soil, can be found in the food itself, and also can be found in the sediments, right? So usually dioxin can affect most of the vital organs in your body, and dioxin accumulates in your fat tissue. Therefore, in order to prevent the dioxin contamination, a very strict food plan processing is needed. Okay, and there are some of the chemical hazard that is due to the waste, such as the mercury contamination, which can contaminate shellfish and also fish from the sea, right? So these are all some sort of chemical hazard that can contaminate food, right? Okay, Even there is a contamination that comes from the food itself. If you eat a poisonous plant or a poisonous fish, such as herbal tea, there are some herbal tea that has deadly nightshade, or if you eat a puffish, okay, because a puffish in their livers and gonad, they have toxins, and or if you eat a raw kidney bean, okay, the problem with the raw kidney bean is that in the raw kidney beans itself, it has a hemagglutinin, which can be toxicate your blood. Okay, but this hemagglutinin can be destroyed by boiling for 10 minutes. Okay, right. In the foodborne illness, most of the diagnosis is from the physical examination, where the patient will be checking for its vital organs. Blood routine test is not a usual concern. Okay, usually the diagnosis can come from the stool samples. Okay, if there is a concern of the cases by Salmonella, Shigella, or Campylobacter jejuni. Okay, that is the diagnosis for the foodborne illness. So, for the treatment of foodborne illness, there is no specific foodborne illness treatment, just in the form of a good hydration, right? And the doctors may want to prescribe a medication that can control nausea or vomiting. Okay, right. The complication of the foodborne illness is dehydration, right? So the aim of foodborne illness treatment is to maintain your body hydrated, right? That is the serious complication. But for those in the what we so called, for those such as youngsters and also elderly or in immunocompromised patient, complication can lead to death or fatal. Okay, so the main point is you have to handle the food safe by adopting a good personal hygiene, because more than 70% of foodborne contamination comes from the food handlers itself. Therefore, you must maintain a proper personal hygiene. So this slide onwards showed some of the roots that pathogen can harbor in your food. Okay, it can harbor from the bad storage of your food. You can see how the food is stored in the dirty container, in the stacked container, like this. And the bacteria can easily harbored if the food is not covered. Okay, properly covered mean in airtight container, and in the dirty kitchen itself, and of course during the preparing of the food through food cross contamination, right? And during the food preparation, if you cook the meat undercooked, right, and doing the thawing of the food and refreezing of the food, okay, this is the most crucial, where thawing, it can lead to the multiplication of the pathogen. But if you refreeze the food back, actually it is more hazardous rather than you freeze the food at the first place. Okay, right? And the last is by controlling the pest, because there are some of the cases where foodborne illness is due to the pests. Some of the pathogen can harbor on the pests, such as rodents or flies. Right, so that's it. We have come to the end of the topic 5. So the main point of foodborne illness, this topic, is you have to know the factors that food pathogens can growth or multiply. You have to know what are the food contamination hazards, and the basic thing is that how to prevent foodborne illness. Okay, come again, and I will give you some of the exercise regarding on this topic 5. Okay, have fun learning topic 5 and see you on next week.